Just about everyone I meet has an opinion, mantra, or theory about the best food to eat or diet to try. Nutrition, probably more than most topics, just inherently has some people thinking that their way is the only way. So, some interesting styles of eating have emerged. My friends and family have tried it all. Low fat, low carb, high carb, vegan, raw, vegetarian, juice cleanses, ketogenic, my plate, Mediterranean, if it fits your macros, paleo, intermittent fasting, and everything in between. The interesting part is that the way you respond to a particular diet may be entirely different than the way that your best friend does. The way we digest, absorb, and use our food is very personal. I had one client who was following to the T the gluten-free diet that her husband followed. She was surprised when I asked her if she liked to eat this way, and her response was, "No, not particularly." Then I asked her if she had an allergy to gluten. Again, her answer was no. She was also feeling tired all the time, and it was obvious to me that her diet simply didn't meet her specific needs. The fad diet popularity may stem from the belief that maybe there's an easy way, a quick way to improve body composition. It also stems from the thought that there may be one diet that is best for everyone. But this just isn't the case. Your personal preferences and physiology have a lot to do with your success in changing body composition through diet and exercise. However, I know that the media attention and science behind some diets is interesting and appealing, but also downright confusing. In this lecture, I will highlight some interesting key points and new research for traditional diets and popular fad diets. Then, I'll wrap it all up with my personal thoughts on choosing your own nutrition path. For many years, the conventional approach to eating in the US was to follow the food guide pyramid. No doubt you've heard of this pyramid before. In fact, many countries have some pyramid design to indicate their eating recommendations. The original design had a wide base of grains, indicating you should build a diet primarily from carbohydrates, leading up to a peak of fat and oils to use sparingly. In 2011, the traditional pyramid was replaced with something called my plate, which is an image of a plate with the food groups on it. Now, the new plate graphic has been both praised and criticized, but it does at least seem like it makes sense to show food on a plate rather than in a pyramid. It was designed to remind Americans to eat healthfully, but not necessarily to change consumer behavior. So this guide is designed to remind us to eat healthfully, but this assumes that most Americans know how to eat healthfully, and that healthfully actually has a definition that is the same for everyone. If you take a glance at the My Plate recommendations, you'll see that it is a bit hard to interpret which foods should be a priority or which foods are recommended. This may not be the best thing for people who are less informed about food types and quality. The My Plate recommendations do encourage variety in what we eat, and they provide some visual cues for proportion of vegetables, fruit, grains, and protein that should be on your plate. It also encourages whole grain consumption rather than simply more grain consumption. And these are all good things, right? My Plate recommendations, however, are very general. The My Plate diet traditionally is thought of as a high carbohydrate, low fat diet. And it suggests that a plate 75% full of grains, vegetables, and fruit, which are all sources of carbohydrates, is the best for everyone, regardless of how active your lifestyle is. For very active people, and especially people who like to work out at high intensities, a higher carbohydrate diet has been supported in the research more times than not. This, though, is usually based upon improving exercise or sport performance, but not everyone is concerned with that type of performance. You may be much more interested in body weight or body composition. You have to keep in mind that the overall calorie and carbohydrate needs of someone who is physically active will be different from someone of the same size and sex who is sitting still all day typing on a computer, for example. It is also important to remember that constantly high blood sugar levels, which you might get following a very high carbohydrate diet without enough exercise, are at least related to many different sorts of ailments, including well-known type 2 diabetes. And don't get me wrong, I don't believe that carbohydrates are inherently a problem, but it is the overconsumption of them combined with a lack of physical activity that tends to get us into some body composition trouble. If you review the MyPlate recommendations more closely, they also suggest that real fruit and 100% fruit juice and real vegetables and 100% vegetable juice are the same thing. However, the ways we digest and absorb solid food compared to liquids are different in many ways, including how fast the nutrients get into your body. In addition, many juices are loaded with added sugars that real fruit does not contain. But I do like the overall emphasis on eating more fruit and vegetables. Lastly, it's important to note that healthy fats don't have a place. Olive oil, avocado, and fish or fish oil are not included at all. And you may recall that healthy fats have a major place in our diets and have some wonderful health benefits. Another drawback is that there is not really a distinction between better choices and worse choices of proteins or carbohydrates. If you check out most of the epidemiological scientific literature, the overall theme is quite consistent for health and weight loss in overweight individuals. You should consume more healthy fats and reduce your intake of refined carbohydrates. There are both pluses and minuses with a high carbohydrate, low fat diet. And it's entirely dependent upon how you feel, look, and perform when eating this way. Over much of the same time that we have been told that a higher carb, low fat diet is best for us, primarily from the MyPlate recommendations, our obesity and diabetes rates have skyrocketed. So naturally, people have been drawn to drastically different eating styles to see if they provide their health and body composition improvements. Thus, the high-fat, low-carb diet was born. This sort of eating goes by many names like Atkins, Paleo, and now Keto. And while these are actually different diets, some major similarities exist. So, what if we eat fewer carbs and more fat? Well, advocates of the high-fat, low-carb diets point to research that shows more fat oxidation or fat burning with this sort of diet and rapid weight loss. So, what does this really mean? Eating a high-fat diet means that fat would make up 60 to 75% of your total caloric intake. The assumption with high-fat diets is that if carbohydrate feeding lowers your ability to burn fat, then a high-fat diet would increase your ability to burn fat as a fuel. It sounds like this might improve body composition, doesn't it? Overall, there is actually a lot of evidence to show improvements in health, body composition, and other physiological functions with a higher fat, low carbohydrate approach. For example, With the high-fat, low-carb diet, there is a higher fat oxidation during exercise, increased availability of free fatty acids, and increased activity of fat oxidation enzymes. Additionally, there is a reduction in enzymes involved with glycolysis, which is the breakdown of sugar to provide energy, along with reduced muscle glycogen and liver glycogen storage. This may be a really critical point. If you can better control blood sugar with a high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet, this could be highly useful for controlling body fat and ultimately your overall body composition. Also, as you might remember from an earlier lecture, fat and protein tend to keep you feeling full for a longer period of time than carbohydrates alone. So, if you can use a high-fat, low-carb approach to improve some health outcomes and maybe even body composition, what's wrong with it? Well, first, it's often carried out incorrectly. What I mean is that when I review what people are actually eating while on a high-fat diet, they usually just eat more fast food, fried food, and processed meats. More often than not, I see a high fat intake with no concern for the type of fat, along with a normal amount of carbohydrate intake. Ultimately, with a plan like this, health does not seem to improve. Second, there are some questions as to the feasibility of a high-fat diet, low-carb diet, when you bring exercise into the equation. Let me explain. Some studies show no difference in exercise performance after you eat a high-fat or high-carb diet. However, these studies usually involve exercise that is done at a low to moderate intensity, like 45% of your VO2 max or your maximal oxygen consumption. That's likely a slow walk. And as you know, this relatively low level of intensity should rely more on fat as a fuel. So it makes sense that exercise performance was no different. But what happens if you exercise at a high intensity or for prolonged periods of time, say 2 to 3 hours or more at one time? If you exercise at high intensities, above 70 to 75% of your maximal ability, then exercise performance may decline on a high-fat diet. Now, of course, there are exceptions, but this is likely the outcome. For example, in one study, untrained people were asked to follow either a high-fat diet or a high-carb diet for 4 days. When the subjects were asked to exercise as long as possible at a relatively high intensity of 70 to 75% of VO2 max, the subjects on the high-fat diets did not perform as well as those on the high-carb diets. It is important to note that people who do a lot of aerobic exercise are able to use fat as a fuel at a much higher exercise intensity than the average person. They may be able to use fat above the 75% mark, although this is uncommon unless you really work at it and consistently stay on these high-fat diets. Additionally, most experts say that it may take far more than 3 to 4 days of a certain diet for all of the advantages or disadvantages to take shape. So it might just be that these studies were too short to show a difference because the subjects are not fat adapted yet. And traditional high-fat, low-carb diets would shake out like this: 60% fat, 20% carbs, and about 20% protein. But I must briefly mention 2 very popular diets that manipulate these percentages. The first is the ketogenic diet. This is really a more extreme version of a typical high-fat, low-carbohydrate diet. While these traditional high-fat diets allow for quite a few carbohydrates, the keto diet tends to keep carbohydrate intake to somewhere around 50 grams of carbohydrates per day. To put that into perspective, that is 2 slices of whole wheat bread or 1 cup of oatmeal for the entire day. This diet is about 5 to 10% carbohydrate, 80% fat, and the rest protein. The ketogenic diet attempts to put a person into nutritional ketosis. Nutritional ketosis is where you burn a lot of fat. Almost all of the energy you use is from fat. And when you do this, ketones are produced as natural byproducts. Your organs and cells use ketones when you are in ketosis instead of glucose. Now, this typically would happen during periods of fasting, or in this case, during extreme carbohydrate restriction. If you test your blood, urine, or breath for these ketones, you would be considered in ketosis if you had a value above 1.0 millimoles per liter. But don't confuse nutritional ketosis with the dangerous condition of ketoacidosis. They are not the same. Ketoacidosis is dangerous and occurs in severe, uncontrolled diabetes. Ketoacidosis occurs when extremely high levels of ketones make your body very acidic, so much so that your normal metabolic physiology can shut down. Nutritional ketosis, however, does not alter your pH nearly as much, and nutritional ketosis will not harm you. The ketogenic diet is being studied for possible use as a treatment for conditions like epilepsy and even brain cancer, and now for body composition and health improvements. There are entire books written on this type of eating, and they are gaining popularity all the time. Eating like this with so little carbohydrate might be difficult for the first few weeks. Reports of irritability, hunger, and lethargy are common. But the experts say that it becomes easier over time, and you can still exercise, perform, think, and concentrate on this sort of diet. You simply switch your primary fuel source away from carbohydrate and instead run on ketones. But this is definitely not for everyone. In fact, in my opinion, cutting out entire food groups isn't necessary. Most of the elimination diets, meaning ones that eliminate an entire macronutrient, help with controlling calorie intake. Let's face it, by not eating an entire nutrient category, you're likely to eat less food overall, particularly in the short term. So, while this diet may work for some people, there are certainly alternatives that provide more options, variety, and pleasure in eating. The second very popular diet to mention is called the paleo diet. This is a dietary approach based on eating like we imagine our ancestors did in order to stay healthy, lean, and fit. The idea is that we evolved to eat certain foods, but not others. The paleo diet emphasizes animal products, nuts and seeds, fruits, and vegetables. Notably, strict followers of the paleo diet do not eat grains, legumes like beans and peas, or dairy foods. This is because the designers of the diet say that these foods did not exist 10,000 years ago, and our ancestors did not eat them. It's sort of a radical back-to-nature approach. Many excellent books and websites dig into the evolution of these paleo theories, and most do not actually hold up to scientific scrutiny from evolutionary biologists and archaeologists, because we don't really know exactly what foods our ancestors ate 10,000 years ago. Nevertheless, the paleo diet overall is an approach worth considering, but likely not for the reasons that paleo followers promote. In general, paleo promotes good quality foods. Research has also shown that the paleo diet improves many markers of health and metabolism. And this diet promotes quality protein intake and lots of vegetables. That must be a good thing. And whole foods are also emphasized. So any way you cut it, this diet is superior to a typical fast food diet. Now, the exclusion of milk, legumes, and grains isn't a one-size-fits-all approach. Those with allergies or sensitivities might fare well, but for everyone else, I'm not sure why you'd eliminate all of these great foods. Honestly, I know many very lean, energetic, and active, healthy people who choose to include milk, legumes, and dairy in their diets. While the arguments about the evolution of our ancestors and farming and eating practices that the paleo diet suggests don't hold up, I do think that there are some really great parts of this diet, as well as the other diets that I've talked about in this lecture. As I mentioned earlier, I have analyzed a number of dietary plans of keto and paleo followers. And what I see more than anything is increases in dietary fat overall, not specifically good fat like avocados, nuts, and seeds. I've also seen extremely high blood triglyceride levels and total body inflammation with this approach. It just seems like there's a lot of confusion about how to implement this dietary approach, particularly for very active people. Interestingly, the original paleo diet has been revised and has changed to a much more reasonable approach that is now mainstream. Things like grass-fed dairy and some starches and wine are now allowed. Now, another diet called intermittent fasting has also gained a lot of attention recently. Intermittent fasting is simply a diet plan where you go for extended periods of time without eating. There are many types of intermittent fasting schedules, and some popular ones include alternate day fasting, where you only eat every other day. Another one called Eat, Stop, Eat, where you have a 24-hour fast about 1 to 2 times per week. And the 16-8 diet, where you fast for 16 hours and then have an 8-hour window where you're allowed to eat. This may sound odd, but intermittent fasting is not really a new concept. Most people fast for about 8 to 10 hours every night. And there are religious observances like Ramadan, where for an entire month, Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset. That sounds pretty close to the 16-8 diet, doesn't it? Research is now accumulating to show some benefits to following an intermittent fasting diet. Health benefits like improved lipids and blood glucose, reduced inflammation in the body, and improved appetite control have all been shown. It seems like common sense, too, that if you eat fewer times in a day, you simply have less time to eat. And some research has shown reductions in body weight and body fat while maintaining muscle mass when 1 meal per day was compared to eating 3 meals per day in healthy men and women who were between the ages of 40 and 50. Also, animal studies have demonstrated increased lifespan following intermittent fasting diets. So theoretically, intermittent fasting could make a difference in body composition. The trouble is that there are so many different styles of fasting. So clear-cut answers are tough to come by. For some people, intermittent fasting fits well into their lifestyle. But if you don't like breakfast and can't be bothered to take a lunch, it might work for you. I have one client who has maintained a 16-hour fast and 8-hour feeding window for over 5 years now. But for others, this style of eating can promote some binge eating at night and less control over what is eaten when you finally get home feeling starved. It is important to note that if you are exercise training while fasted, and you do this regularly, data show elevated markers of damage and overall stress. And almost all data shows a performance advantage from eating food prior to exercise and a performance decrease if you are fasted. For example, research on athletes that are fasted indicates a reduction in speed, agility, endurance, and decreases in mood and alertness. Occasionally, using a fasted workout is fine as part of a larger plan for a specific goal, but I wouldn't recommend it for every single workout. The bottom line is that the benefits reported from intermittent fasting have also been shown with exercise and a restriction-free diet. So I would only choose intermittent fasting if you know it fits your lifestyle and you know you can stick to it. As you might be able to tell by now, people are serious about supporting or bashing either the high-carb, low-fat approach or the low-carb, high-fat approach. For some reason, this riles people up as much as an argument about politics. You may even feel this way about the various fad diets that you've tried. But let's be smart about this. I think there are certain good points to most of these diets that exist. And these include controlling calorie intake, attempting to have more people eat high-quality foods, and limiting highly processed and highly sugar-filled foods, as well as trying to make it easy to follow. You'll see these commonalities regardless of the diet plan. So, how do we get it right? Which diet do we choose? Well, the bookstore probably won't help too much. You'll see thousands of dietary books on the shelves. This, more than almost anything, shows that we don't have it right yet, and that we're still searching for the optimal way to eat. In a book called Faster, Higher, Stronger, author Mark McCluskey says that it's the execution of what you know to be true that's most helpful, and not getting lost chasing some magic bullet. Well, I agree. It's all about taking care of the most basics first. For example, maybe just eat more vegetables for 3 weeks until it becomes part of your daily routine. Then, and only then, try a new habit like eating more lean protein for a few weeks. Handle your basic nutrition needs and see how your body responds to the foods you eat. What makes you feel good, energetic, and healthy? These questions are often lost in the sea of concerns about body weight. The best approach is to pick just 1 or 2 attainable goals and master them. Avoid all the other stuff you hear about. For example, McCluskey described this recommendation for athletes. Eat 1 gram of protein daily for every pound of body weight to support muscular growth. And eat at least 8 fist-sized servings of vegetables per day. The mantra has become to eat better to change your body composition, not less. Here are a few strategies that I use personally. Aim for minimally processed foods. Try for fewer refined starches and sugars. Eat protein with each meal or snack. Eat more fruits and vegetables. And eat more good fat like nuts, eggs, avocado, and fish. The goals of any of these strategies are simple. Emphasize quality in your diet and understand that one positive habit you adopt, no matter how simple, so long as you can adhere to it, can make a great long-term impact on your body composition and health. Try this. Rather than a fad diet, choose a healthy eating habit that I outlined and start by fitting it into your schedule just 2 times per week.